Hello guys, welcome to the first episode of this series that I've decided to create to talk about Redux with React for persisting data and managing the state of your application. So if you do not know anything about Redux, this is the perfect place for you. If you know a little, about React, but you haven't worked with Redux, you don't know anything about state management, I think this playlist will help you a lot to not only understand the concepts, the ideas, but also to see how these get implemented inside of a simple, easy to understand, but real application. So we're going to have our notes here. As always, we're going to have our project here, right? In my other, instance of Visual Studio Code. And I've got different branches, right? I've got different branches here. Right now, I'm on branch for episode 1. I have developed this application little by little, and I have created branches for, each episode. Don't forget that the source code of this, playlist is available in the description of this video. It is totally 100% free. You can, fetch the repository from my GitHub and, clone it, work with it, uh, you know, uh, kind of change it, right? To be able to see how this state management thing with Redux actually works. So without further ado, let's get started with episode number 1. So I'm going to zoom in. This is episode number 1 of our Redux series. In this episode, what I am going to do is to set up Redux in a React application. So I've got my React application here. I have created my React application using Vite. Sometimes it is called Vite, but I think it is better to pronounce it Vite because there is this word in French called Vite, which means fast. So I guess, the idea behind Vite is because it makes your, let's say, creation of your application faster than something like npx. The word Vite, I think it is better to pronounce this as Vite, not Vite. I don't know really, but I prefer to, pronounce this as Vite. So I've got my application in Visual Studio. I'm going to set up Redux. I'm going to start using Redux for state management using local data. There are no servers here. There are no API calls because I want the tutorial to be easy to understand. And in other videos, in other playlists that I've got here, I have integrated Redux with a backend API. Right? There is this playlist about 10 stack query that you can, uh, probably watch. That shows you how to use Redux and other, related technologies to communicate with a backend API. But in this episode, in this series, there are no servers, there are no API calls. Everything is local. So this approach is, again, ideal to understand the building blocks of Redux without distraction of any logic or external services. By the end of this playlist, what you are going to understand is what Redux is, how does a store work, right? What are actions? How actions trigger changes, what are reducers, how reducers apply the changes, right? And how to read data, how to write to Redux state using hooks. So, in order to better, let's say, demonstrate the capabilities of Redux in a React application, I have decided to take the example of a simple domain called employee management. Like there's going to be like an application called employee manager, which is responsible for, implementing a couple of simple scenarios. Like for example, showing a list of employees. The list of employees are hard coded inside of our Redux store. We're going to talk about our Redux and the store. The next functionality will be to be able to add a new employee with a text input inside of a component. And of course, the list will get updated automatically. And we're going to add the next operations as we go through the playlist. So we're going to have another operation for deleting an employee, like updating an employee, and so on. So basic CRUD operations: create, read, update, delete on some local data, employees, right, in a React application. So the first step for us, after you create your application using Vite, is to install Redux Toolkit and React Redux. So this is the npm, let's say install command that you need to invoke, that you need to run in order to be able to install Redux Toolkit and React Redux. So I have already installed React Redux inside of the application that I've got here, right? I'm going to show you that. And then if I go to my package.json, right, you can see that I've got, these dependencies. So I've got my React Redux here. So you need to, run those commands in order to be able to kind of have your Redux toolkit and React Redux in place. Why these packages? The Redux toolkit, this is the official modern way to write Redux logic. It eliminates a lot of boilerplate. React Redux, it provides binding between React and Redux, like for example the provider that we're going to see, and hooks like useSelector, useDispatch, and so on. So this is the first step then. The first step is to create these two, to install these two packages. The next step for us is to create a slice. And I'm going to talk about the concept of a slice, what a slice is. So I'm going to create, inside of my project, I'm going to create a features folder. Inside of it, I'm going to create an employees, and then I'm going to create this file called employees.js. So this is going to be a slice, right? And let me show you what a slice is. So create a slice is, as you can see here, what we are importing from our Redux toolkit, right? Create a slice. And we are using this to create a new slice. So what is a slice? Create a slice, think of a slice as a focused piece of state plus logic. So some data and some logic. Like for example, employees, authentication, products. So a slice is a portion of the data that your application manages. And it is related to, let's say in this case, employees. So we are creating a slice for an employee. So think of it as, a slice of your data, the slice of the data plus operations and logic that your application needs to manage. And it is focused because it focuses on, employees in this case. We could have another slice, for, let's say, products in order to, let's say, maintain the operations and data related to the product. And then we've got this initial state. So again, a slice is responsible for maintaining the state and logic related to, let's say, an entity, employee. And then we've got this initial state. So for this slice that we are creating here, employee slice, we are creating an initial state. So the initial state means the initial data for this slice is going to be a list, an empty list, an empty array, right? So whenever this new slice is created for an employee, the data we want to be able to store in it right now is an empty array. And as you can see here, inside of the object we are passing to the create slice, we are not only specifying the name of our slice, employees, but also we are, specifying the initial state that we want. And the initial state is this object that we have created here, which contains an empty array. So this is the initial state, and the initial state will get, updated as we go along. We're going to add new employees to this array. We're going to remove employees from this. But first off is going to be an empty array. So the reducers are functions that change the state. So we kind of talked that the state is going to be a list of employees. Initially, it's going to be empty. And then we're going to have some reducers. The reducers are the function that change this state. For example, they add an employee to the array. They remove an employee from the array. These are reducers. And then we have another concept called action creators. So these are the functions that describe what to change, right? Let me show you the reducers. So these are the reducers. As you can see, we've got this object called reducers. The reducers, as I told you, I mean, they kind of operate on this initial state. They change this initial state. In this case, we are having this add employee. And as you can see, it is using the state, right? It is taking in two parameters, state and action. It is taking the state and then the list, which is, of course, this one, right? The list. And then it is pushing like whatever is passed in to this, add employee method, the payload of that action. We're going to see how to set the payload. What is the payload here, right? But think of it that, for example, this action object has a payload property, and this payload property represents an employee in this case, and that employee is going to get pushed to this empty list that we've got here whenever this reducer is called, right? So again, the action creators, functions that describe what to change, the action creators, like for example, add employee, a reducer. Action creators are not, in this case is not the employee. The employee or add employee actually is a reducer. So we've got like a collection of reducers, as you can see here. So the first reducer in our case is add employee, a reducer that mutates the state using immer, allowing us to push, like for example, it's regular JavaScript, but it keeps state immutable under the hood. So one thing that you need to always remember about reducers is that reducers, right, they shouldn't change the state directly. So you cannot, for example, go to state and change the list directly because everything in your state needs to be immutable. And I mean, when you make your state immutable, the managing that state is easier, right? So immutability, and this, I mean, the same concept, is also available in other programming languages, like for example C#. So immutability has many advantages. One big advantage is that managing something which is immutable, like a slice, is very easy. So you should always remember to keep your slice and your state immutable. You cannot change it directly like this, but this is a special syntax, a special approach that I'm going to elaborate on further as we go through the videos. So this is what we've got here, right? And then we're gonna export two things. As you can see here, we're gonna export this reducer, right? Add employee, which is responsible for, adding an employee to the estate. And of course, we're gonna export this reducer, employees slice reducer, not reducers, reducer here with a default keyword. So these are the two things that you need to export from your slice, and then you're going to be able to use these from outside of your slice. And I can show you here the slice that I've got inside of my application. So take a look. I've got my initial state, right? I've got my initial state. I've got the creation of the employee slice, the name, the initial state, the reducers object with one reducer, add employee, and then I am exporting employee slice.reducer, not reducers, right? There is this capital S here. Be careful. You need to export reducer. And then we've got this add employee, which is like an action creator. We are exporting this so that we can, use this from outside the slice. Back to the notes. The next step is to create the store. Now that we've got our slice in place, at least we've got one slice right now, right? Employees slice. We need to create our store. So this is the store that we've got. We've got this store.js file. We are importing the employees reducer. This was the default export from our slice. We are importing configure store. So in our slice, we imported create a slice. In our store, we are importing configure store. And then here, as you can see, we are creating our store, right? Export const store, we are using configure store. And then we are setting this object reducer, right, to what we imported from our employee slice. So from our employee slice, we, imported, take a look here, we exported this employee slice that reducer. This was the default export. So we are importing this here. And then inside of our store, we are using this employee reducer and we are setting like a property employees on this, reducer object. So again, configure store sets up the Redux store with sensible defaults like Redux DevTools. We're telling Redux, hey, our app has a slice of a state called employees, and here's how to handle it. So I can show you the store that I've got here. This is the store that I just showed you, right? So again, you are importing the default export from your slice. You are creating your store, and of course, you are exporting this using the configure store, right? And then you are setting this object called reducer, not reducers, with the employees reducer that you imported from the employees slice. With these employees, right? This is the key that you have decided to have for your, reducer. And of course here, this employee slice reducer that you are, exporting by default is going to get imported inside of your store. So things are, I think, starting to make more sense, right? We are wiring up different things. So first off, we have decided to create a slice, which is like a portion of the data that your application maintains, some data, some operations. So this is, for example, the operation, and this is the data. So a list of employees, an operation called add employee. This is one portion of your data, the data that your application maintains. Your application could have as many slices as it wants. And then you kind of manage these slices inside of your store. So your store now manages or, manages that portion of your data, the employee slice. Then we could have another slice for example, departments. And then all you need to do is to, add that, new slice called department to the reducer object of your store. Now provide the store to React. Of course, we've got this store, we've got this slice. Now we want to be able to use that. So inside of your index file, inside of your application, you are going to import your store. You are going to import provider from React Redux, right? And then you're going to wrap your application. You're going to wrap your application with the provider coming from React Redux. And then you are going to specify the store. And this is the store that you imported from the store that you just created, right? So this is kind of the way that you provide your application with the store and the slice that you have previously created. So if you go to, main.jsx, you can see that I've imported the store we just created. I'm importing the provider, and I am wrapping my application with this provider, and I am specifying the store. Why use the provider? React doesn't know, right? React doesn't know about Redux unless we tell it. So the provider component wrap your apps and injects the Redux store so that any component can connect to it. So right now that we have provided our application with our store, our application, our components will be able to work with that store, with that, with that store and with those slices. Now we're going to create a component. The component is called employee manager, right? Take a look here. It's not going to be difficult, right? It's not going to be difficult, but it's going to be a little bit more involved than the code we examined for a state for a slice and a store. First off, I am importing the use selector and use dispatch from our React Redux, and I'm going to tell you what these are. And then from my employees slice, I am importing my add employee action. So this was not the default export, right? That's the reason why I've got these curly braces here. So I've got this add employee from my slice. I've got my use dispatch and use selector, right? And of course, I've got my React and use state here as well. Now the component itself. First off, we need to be able to tell our component, right, to use a portion of our state. And in order to do that, we've got a slice, right, for employees. In order to do that, we're going to use this hook, use selector. So inside of our slice, we had this list of employees, right? So here we are saying that I've got this variable called employees, and using use selector, I'm going to pass in the state, and then from the state, I'm going to go to employees, and then I'm going to take the list of that employees inside of my state. And then this is the dispatch hook, use dispatch. So we use dispatch to kind of invoke the for example, different reducers that are available, like for example, add employee. So let me take you to the explanation as well. So use selector, I told you, use selector reads data from Redux. Here it pulls employees.list. And if you want to, refresh your memory of what employees.list means, if I take you to employees slice, you see that here we've got this list, right? And that employees is the name that you have decided to have for your slice. So this combined with list gives us employees.list. And how can we use selector with employees list? Don't forget that we created this slice and then we kind of added the slice to our store here, right? Employees.list, you can see employees here. What I need to clarify is that the name that you have here could be different from the name that you set here, right? So employees.list is basically this employees and the list that you've got here inside of your initial state. But in this case, I have decided to go with the same name, employees and employees here, right? So the slice, the store, and then the store is, the app is, let's say, wrapped with our provider and a store, and that gives us the ability in our component to use the use selector and then to be able to go to the store, to the estate, to the employees, and then fetch the list of employees, and then maintain that list of employees inside of this employees, variable. And then I told you that the use dispatch is a hook that you use, if you take a look here, right, that you use in order to invoke the reducer function add employee. And the reducer, as I told you, is a function responsible for mutating the data. In this case, mutating the employees, for example. So another thing that I want to tell you is that here we've got this state name and set name with the initial value, right? An empty string. And then we've got this method, handle add. This is an event handler that I have added here. If you take a look here, the onClick is going to be handled using handle add. And we're going to see what this handle add is doing. So handle add. First, it's going to check out the name state. And this state name is going to get updated using, as you can see here, this input. So the value of this input is coming from the state, and whenever there is this unchanged event, the value inside of that, input is going to get set to that, state that we have, right? So here, as you can see, the name, the state is being evaluated. It is going to get trimmed, and then we are going to dispatch the add employee, which we imported from here. We're going to set the ID with date.now, and we're going to set the name of an employee. And then we're going to set the name, the state, into an empty string, which of course means that the value of that input will get updated, right? And of course, this is, as I said, the event handler for the button. And here, after the event handler, we've got this unordered list that goes through that list, which we got using the state and use selector hook. And then we're going to map each employee to list item. We're going to print out the name of an employee and the ID of an employee, right? So this is the way it works. We kind of talked about, these different, concepts, dates.now, dispatch, use dispatch, and so on. This is the controlled, component. And your input state lives in React, employee list state lives in Redux. This is the, state, the name of an employee, which is a state inside of the component. So the component is responsible for maintaining the name of an employee with that input, but the list of employees are gonna, be managed by our state, by our store, Redux. And then we can, of course, use the app inside of the, the component inside of our app. If I go to app.jsx, you can see that I am, adding my component here. And then, of course, I am, showing the list of components here. Now I'm going to run the, application to show you what it means to, run this application. So this is the application. I ran the application using the script I've got inside of my package.json npm run dev. And then this is the, component that we've got, employee manager, and this is the title, right? And of course I can start adding, employees, and these are going to get added to the list. The name of an employee is a state inside of the component. It is local to that component, right? The component, the employee manager component, maintains the list of that employee. So whenever you input something inside of that input box, that use state is gonna, start working and update that, local state to that component. But the list of the employees are gonna be managed. The list is managed using the state that we've got, the application, the Redux store that we, created. So again, this is the way everything is wired up. I know that right now things might, be a little bit confusing, but no worries. If you continue watching the next episode, everything will start to make more sense, because little by little we are going to add more functionalities to this simple app. Right now, what we are, what we have implemented is like the add functionality, and of course the list functionality. So we are also listing the, employees that we are adding. But little by little, we are going to improve on this. We're going to, for example, store the state of the application inside of the local storage of our browser to persist it. But this is the way it works. We're going to revisit the store, the slice, the, other things that we implemented in this video inside of the future episodes. Thank you so much for watching this. If you enjoyed it, please give it a thumbs up and stay tuned for the next episodes as well.